in today's video, we will keep talking about arithmetic operations in C#. We will be talking mainly about integer division, double division. We'll also be talking about the remainder operator in C#. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the math class functions, and we will give an example using the power function. And to do that, we will continue using our game rental application, but this time we will be using the payments form. So this specific form allows the user to enter a specific amount to be repaid over a number of periods, and it will calculate the remainder amount. So if the minimum payment is set to $10 per period, what is the remainder amount? And keep in mind that this application is designed for kids and teenagers, so it would just help them identify what type of amounts they would need to be paying over a specific number of periods, and what would be the remainder amount that they would need to pay in case they select to have a credit card through the store. Alright, so to do that, let's change the calculate remainder button click. And to calculate the remainder, we first need to create variables for our values. We will create a double variable that will hold our total amount to be repaid. We will set that variable to be equal to the value of the text box. That is the total amount text box. The next variable that we can have is the number of periods, payments periods. So we'll call it number of periods. We will also need to parse that variable since it is stored in the form of a string. Now the last piece of information that we need is the minimum amount, payment amount, and that is set to $10, and we're not allowing the user to change that amount. So what we can do is to create a constant, and the way to do that in C# is to use the keyword const along with the double. So that would be a double variable. We will call it min payments, and it will be set to $10. We could also get it, have it be set to our minimum payment amount labels text. But then again, we're going to have to parse that variable back to a double. Now we have all of the variables that we need to make our calculations. The last variable we need is the one that will store the output, and that would be our remainder amount. So the way this works, we will use the total amount, and we will use the remainder operator divided up by the number of periods multiplied by the minimum payment amount. So let's see what we did here. Instead of using the simple double division for calculating a payment amount, so to calculate a payment amount, we would have done total amount divided by number of periods. But now this is not what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what would be the remainder amount if we were to pay $10 per period for a specific number of periods. Okay, so let's test that and see how that works. we have a remainder amount label that we will have holding our remainder amount value, parts to a string, of course. And let's test that. We have an error. Let's see what we missed right here. It does not like us using the label text, so we will just have to set that constant to a hard-coded $10. Now here, when we try to launch our application, we see that we are getting the game rental form. That's not what we want to test today. So the way to change that is to go to the program.cs and change this name right here. So see here how the application is trying to run the game rental form. Well, instead we will tell it to run the payments form. That should do it. So here, let's say we enter $200 for the total amount to be repaid. If we were to use 20 periods, then our remainder is really 0, because over 20 periods we will repay the whole amount. If our total amount is now set to 250, then our remainder will be $50. So basically what the application does, it takes the total amount and then it divides it up by the minimum payment amount multiplied by the period. So that is the total amount that we will be paying over all these periods, and then whatever is left over is our remainder value, and that is what is calculated by our remainder operator right here. The next thing we will do right now is to change this minimum payment amount to become our output variable. So instead of having a fixed amount to be repaid over every period, we will have this payment amount to vary. So it would not be called minimum anymore. So we'll call it payment amount. And this variable right here will not be really used anymore, so we'll delete that. We'll create another label. We will set an initial value of 0. Set it to $0. And then we will call this variable our payment amount per period, because this is per period. We'll still have the label. Alright, we don't need this anymore. So now what the application would do is to simply calculate our payment amount. Let's increase the font of this label. So very simple division. Instead of calculating the remainder, let's comment out this whole section of code. And now what we want to do is to divide the total amount to be repaid by the number of periods. And we will store that value in our label. Let's test that. We're missing a dot text here. So now let's say we have $650. We would like to pay it over 24 periods. So this would be our payment amount. The last thing we're going to add to this application is an interest rate. So we're going to add in a label. Let's change the font. We'll have another label that will contain the value of our interest rate. And we'll set our interest rate to be 0.25 for now. Alright, so now we need to calculate. We still need to change the text on our button. So now what we will have to do is to add in the interest rate to our total payment amount. So let's try to do that. So we will create an interest amount variable. And our interest amount variable will include our payment amount that we just calculated, multiplied by our interest rate. This is our interest rate label. So we will use the text out in this label. And let's not forget to parse that value into a double. So we have our payment amount multiplied by the interest rate. Now what we need to do is also include the periods. Like you all know, the interest rate needs to include the periods because that interest rate is going to increase depending on the number of periods that you use to pay back the total amount. And the way to do that is normally to use the power function. And in C# there is a power function that is already implemented for you that you can use. It is included in the math class along with several other functions that are very, very useful, and they're available through the math class in C#. Now I just wanted to give you an example of how to use these functions, and let's just look at the help that's provided to us. So when you type in math.function, it will give you the definition of the function. It will tell you what the function returns, and it would also give you the function arguments. So here we need to pass in two different variables. So the first variable will be or first argument will be our interest rates, and then the second argument would be the number of periods. So let's look at what we've done here. So we have our interest rate to the power of the number of periods, and then we multiply it by our payments amount, and then we get our interest amount. So let's print this value and see what we get. Right, let's test that. So now let's set our total amount to be repaid $200. We want to pay it over a period of 10 or over 10 periods. Now this is going to be our interest amount. So this is the interest amount that we need to be paying. Now we need to ignore this payment amount because this payment amount only includes payments without interest. So now if we were to add in that interest amount, we could add it to the payment amount, and then we could use that into formula to regenerate the new payment amount, including the interest rate. But we're not going to do that for the purpose of this video. This was a simple example to show you how the math function could be used in C#. But we're not going to do this today. This was a very simple example to show you how the math functions are used in C#. We use the power function. We also have used the division operator as well as the remainder operator. So I hope this video has been helpful, and see you next time.